They wanted to break him. They did everything to prevent him from rising. But he didn't just stand up, he showed how to fight for your dream. Watch until the end. For as long as Marcus Brown could remember, the scent of roasted coffee beans and the gentle hum of an espresso machine had filled his daydreams. Growing up in the modest neighborhood of Maple Heights, Ohio, a place where the sidewalks cracked and the streetlights flickered like tired eyes, Marcus had always been drawn to the idea of building something that was his own. Not just for himself, but for his community, something that could stand tall amidst the boarded-up shops and closed-down diners. He had watched his mother, a nurse working double shifts, struggle to put food on the table after his father left when Marcus was just 8. He knew what it meant to make a dollar stretch and how to turn a meal of rice and beans into a family feast. His dream? To open a coffee shop, one that would become a warm, welcoming hub for everyone in the neighborhood, a place where people of all colors, ages, and backgrounds could gather, share stories, and feel like they belonged. At first, it seemed like a naive fantasy, a quiet whisper that he only dared to voice in the pages of his worn-out journal. But after years of saving every penny from his job at the local grocery store and spending sleepless nights researching business plans, Marcus decided it was time to turn his dream into reality. He wanted to create something more than just a coffee shop. He wanted to build a sanctuary, a place that defied the negativity he had grown up surrounded by. But from the moment he announced his plans, the storm began. It started as whispers, harmless, almost trivial remarks at first. "Marcus, opening a business in this neighborhood? Good luck with that, man," said Jason, a friend he'd known since high school, half laughing, half dismissing. "Maybe stick to stocking shelves, Marcus," muttered Mrs. Green, the elderly lady who lived down the street and always seemed to know everyone's business. "This world isn't built for people like us to succeed." But the whispers grew louder, sharper, and more insidious as the days passed. When Marcus approached the local bank for a small business loan, the loan officer, a clean-cut man named Thomas Withers, barely glanced at his application before offering a tight-lipped smile. "You know, Mr. Brown, starting a business is risky, especially for someone with your background. Perhaps you should consider something less ambitious. Maybe a job at the warehouse? They're always hiring." Marcus clenched his fists beneath the desk, the words "your background" ringing in his ears like a gunshot. He forced a smile and thanked Thomas for his time, but the sting was deep and lasting. Even his neighbors, people he'd known his whole life, seemed to turn their backs. The Mackenzies, who had once shared barbecues in his backyard, crossed the street when they saw him. The local preacher, Pastor Dean, gave a sermon that seemed eerily directed at him. "Pride comes before a fall, and we must remember our place in the world." It wasn't just the social rejection. Marcus faced vandalism before he even had a storefront. The for lease sign he'd posted in a small vacant building on Main Street was defaced overnight with graffiti, "Stay in your lane, Marcus." His tires were slashed, and someone even left a dead rat on his doorstep. The weight of it all was crushing. There were nights when Marcus sat alone in his small apartment, the only light coming from the flickering TV, wondering if they were right. Maybe he was foolish to think he could rise above the expectations society had placed on him. The darkness crept in, whispering doubts into his ears like a venomous snake. "They'll never let you succeed. You're just a black man in a broken town. You'll never be more than a shelf stalker, a dreamer too naive for the real world." But then there was Clara. Clara Mitchell, the soft-spoken woman who ran the flower shop on the corner, was one of the few who believed in him. Every morning, she'd bring him a cup of coffee and a small bouquet to remind you that beauty grows even in hard soil, she'd say with a smile. "You've got something special, Marcus," she told him one rainy afternoon as they stood beneath the awning of her shop. "Don't let them dim your light. People like you? You're the spark this town needs." Her kindness became a lifeline. On the nights when he felt like giving up, Marcus would stare at the little bouquet sitting on his windowsill, its petals reaching for the sunlight, and remember Clara's words. And so, Marcus pushed forward. He started small, selling cups of coffee from a rented cart at the local farmer's market, rain or shine. He woke up before dawn, ground the beans by hand, and brewed the coffee himself. The early days were brutal. Some people would walk right past him, others would make snide remarks. "Bet that coffee tastes like dirt," someone jeered once. But others, like Mr. Lewis, the retired postal worker, and Maria Hernandez, the single mother of 3, began to stop by regularly. They told their friends, and slowly, a small but loyal customer base formed. Marcus kept showing up, kept smiling, and kept pouring cups of hope into a community that didn't always seem to want it. Little by little, the dream that had nearly been snuffed out began to flicker back to life. But the road ahead was still long, and the weight of the resistance was far from over. Marcus didn't know it yet, but the battles he had faced so far were just the beginning. The real tests, the ones that would push him to the brink, were still to come. And through it all, one thought burned bright in his mind. When I make it, I'll never forget the people who stood by me. Not for a single second. The sun was just peeking over the rooftops of Maple Heights when Marcus opened his eyes that morning, the scent of damp earth and brewing storms hanging heavy in the air. It had been 2 weeks since he'd set up his small coffee cart at the farmer's market, and every day had been an uphill battle. Some mornings, the chill would seep through his thin jacket, the cold biting at his fingers as he tried to keep the coffee hot enough for customers. Other days, the sun blazed so fiercely that sweat poured down his back as he worked the manual grinder, beads of sweat dripping into his eyes as he forced himself to smile through the fatigue. But Marcus refused to stop. Every cup of coffee he sold felt like a small rebellion, a quiet defiance against the voices that told him he would never make it. The market itself was a patchwork of colorful stalls and bustling families, but for Marcus, it sometimes felt like enemy territory. The older white vendors, like Hank from the honey stand and Lisa from the jams table, would glance his way with tight, polite smiles that never reached their eyes. They whispered to each other behind their hands, and Marcus could feel their stares like cold daggers on the back of his neck. Some customers would approach, glance at his sign, and then turn away with a scoff. "Coffee's coffee," one man muttered, shaking his head. "Why should I pay him for it?" The words stung, but Marcus never let them see the pain. He kept his head high, his smile steady, and poured cup after cup, focusing on the customers who did stop, who did give him a chance. And every day, Clara Mitchell showed up. "Morning, Marcus," she'd greet, her voice soft and warm like a sunrise. She'd hand him a fresh flower, sunflowers, daisies, or sometimes a sprig of lavender, and whisper, "You're making a difference, even if they don't see it yet." Her words were like armor, and Marcus carried them with him as he faced the steady barrage of hostility. But then came the day that nearly broke him. It was a Saturday, the busiest market day of the week, and Marcus had managed to attract a small crowd. His regulars, Mr. Lewis, Maria Hernandez, and even a few curious college students had stopped by, praising his new vanilla blend and chatting as they sipped. That's when they showed up. A group of 4 young men, all wearing matching varsity jackets from the local high school, swaggered up to his cart with smirks on their faces. "Hey, Marcus," the tallest one sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "Heard you're trying to play businessman." "That's cute." Marcus kept his composure, wiping the counter with a rag and greeting them politely. "Good morning. Can I get you gentlemen a cup of coffee?" The leader leaned in close, his breath hot and sour with chewing tobacco. "Tell me, Marcus," he said, voice low, "you really think people around here want to buy from someone like you?" The words hit like a slap. The customers nearby froze, a few glancing away uncomfortably, others watching with wide eyes, unsure what to do. Marcus felt the weight of every eye on him, the tension crackling in the air like static. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to stand tall. "I believe good coffee speaks for itself," he replied, voice steady but tight. "And I believe in treating everyone with respect." The boy snorted, then, in a single swift motion, knocked the coffee cups off the table, spilling hot liquid everywhere. The cups tumbled, clattering onto the pavement, the rich, dark brew pooling like spilled dreams at Marcus's feet. A shocked gasp rippled through the market. For a long, agonizing moment, Marcus just stood there, fists clenched so tight his nails dug into his palms. The heat in his chest burned like wildfire, a mix of rage, humiliation, and despair. But then he saw her, Clara, standing just a few feet away, her eyes locked on his, silently willing him not to break. And Marcus remembered the promise he had made to himself. They won't break me. They won't take this from me. With a deep breath, Marcus bent down, picked up the cups, and started cleaning. He worked methodically, his hands steady even though his heart was racing. "Show's over," he said calmly, looking the boys straight in the eyes. "Unless you're here to buy a cup, I suggest you move along." The leader scoffed, muttered something under his breath, and walked away, his friends trailing behind him. The moment they left, Marcus expected silence, maybe even more stares. But instead, something remarkable happened. Mr. Lewis stepped forward, placed a firm hand on Marcus's shoulder, and said, "You handled that like a man, son." Maria Hernandez nodded, her voice soft but sure. "You're stronger than them, Marcus." And then Clara, her eyes shining with fierce pride, handed him a fresh flower. "You're not alone in this," she whispered. "Not anymore." Tears burned behind Marcus's eyes, but he blinked them away, standing tall as he cleaned up the mess. That night, as he sat in his small apartment surrounded by silence, Marcus felt something shift inside him. The resistance was still there, he knew that. The prejudice, the whispers, the slashed tires, and the dirty looks, they weren't going away anytime soon. But something else was growing too, a quiet, determined strength. For every person who tried to tear him down, there were now two who stood quietly behind him. The journey was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. But Marcus Brown, the boy from Maple Heights who had dared to dream, knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to stop. Not for anyone. And as he drifted off to sleep, the scent of Clara's flower on his nightstand filling the room, Marcus whispered to himself the same words he had written in the margins of his journal. "I will remember who stood by me. And when I get there, I'll make sure they know what they meant to me." The next few months became a blur of long days and even longer nights. Marcus woke before dawn each morning, his hands numb as he prepared the coffee cart, grinding beans, measuring out scoops, and prepping his syrups. He learned to ration every dollar, often skipping meals so he could afford new supplies or replace broken equipment. But the market's resistance didn't fade. Every day brought fresh challenges, sideways glances, cold shoulders, whispered slurs when they thought he couldn't hear. There was the man who accidentally spilled an entire tray of croissants onto Marcus's cart, muttering, "Maybe you should go back to where you came from." The woman who complained loudly that his coffee tasted strange compared to the others. The couple who returned a half-finished cup, their lips twisted in disgust, and demanded a refund, saying they couldn't trust what was in it. Marcus tried to hold his head high, but the weight of it all day after day, week after week, began to gnaw at his soul. One night, after a particularly brutal day when someone had left a crumpled note reading, "You'll never make it here, boy," on his cart, Marcus sat alone in his dim apartment, staring at the words scrawled on the paper. His hands trembled, the knot in his chest tightening until it felt like he couldn't breathe. He thought of his mother's voice, soft but strong, saying, "Baby, don't you let this world make you small. You're bigger than their hate." But that night, Marcus felt small. He felt crushed. He almost gave up. Almost. But then, as he sat there in the darkness, something sparked inside him. Marcus realized he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for every kid in Maple Heights who had ever been told they weren't enough. He was fighting for his mother, who had cleaned houses until her hands bled. He was fighting for Clara, who showed up every morning with a smile, even when the world around them tried to snuff out their light. He couldn't let them down. So he wiped his tears, took a deep breath, and began to write a plan. If the market wouldn't accept him, he would build something that couldn't be ignored. He would create an experience so good, so undeniable, that even the doubters would have to take notice. He started small. Marcus began experimenting with flavors, sourcing local honey from Hank, despite the man's frosty demeanor, partnering with Maria Hernandez for her fresh pastries, and even striking a quiet deal with a local farmer for oat milk and fresh herbs. He created a signature drink, the brown sugar maple latte, a warm, spiced blend that tasted like fall wrapped in a hug. Word started to spread. It was slow at first, a trickle, a whisper. The college students who had once scoffed at him started posting photos on Instagram, tagging Marcus's cart and raving about the best coffee in Maple Heights. A food blogger stumbled across his cart and wrote a glowing review, calling Marcus the heartbeat of the market. Clara, as always, was his biggest champion. She brought friends, family, even coworkers, introducing them to Marcus with a proud smile. But the real test came on a stormy Saturday in late October. The forecast had called for heavy rain and gusting winds, and many vendors packed up early, assuming the market would be awash. Marcus, too, considered staying home. He had barely slept, his body aching from days of hard labor, and the thought of standing alone in the rain was unbearable. But Clara's voice echoed in his mind. "You're stronger than you think, Marcus." So he showed up. The rain lashed the streets, the wind howling like a freight train, and the market was nearly deserted. Marcus stood shivering beneath a small canopy, his cart weighted down by sandbags, his fingers numb as he prepped the coffee. And then, just as he was about to pack up, a car pulled up, its headlights slicing through the downpour. Clara stepped out, her umbrella nearly turning inside out from the wind. She was soaked, her hair plastered to her face, but she wore that same bright smile as she approached. "I figured you'd still be here," she said, breathless, as she ordered her usual. Marcus stared at her, the lump in his throat making it hard to speak. "You didn't have to come," he finally managed. "I wanted to come," she replied softly, wrapping her hands around the warm cup he handed her. "You're building something here, Marcus. Don't you ever forget that." Her words were like fuel to his fire. More cars started pulling in one, then another. People emerged from the storm, umbrellas bobbing, boots splashing through puddles. They came for Marcus's coffee, for the warmth he offered in a cold, unkind world. By the time the storm passed, Marcus had sold out. That night, as he packed up the cart and stared at the empty cups, Marcus felt something shift inside him. He was no longer just surviving Maple Heights. He was changing it. And while there were still battles ahead, Marcus knew he had planted a seed. One that would grow into something far bigger than a single coffee cart. Something that would one day bloom into a legacy. The weeks following that stormy Saturday felt like a dream for Marcus. Word had truly begun to spread. The whispers that once worked to tear him down were now lifting him up. "Have you tried Marcus's coffee yet?" became a common refrain among locals. The small cart that had once been overlooked now had a small line most mornings. It wasn't a flood of customers, not yet. But it was enough to keep Marcus going, enough to prove that perseverance could, in fact, chip away at the walls society tried to build around people like him. But the real turning point came one crisp morning in late November, when a man Marcus didn't recognize approached the cart. He was tall, older, maybe mid-50s, wearing a camel-colored coat and a scarf that screamed money. His shoes shone like polished obsidian, and the way he carried himself, shoulders back, chin high, made Marcus's stomach clench. This was the kind of man who usually never glanced at Marcus, let alone stood in line at his cart. "Are you Marcus?" the man asked, his voice smooth but firm. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied cautiously, wiping his hands on his apron. "I've heard about you," the man continued, scanning the menu. "From my daughter, actually. She can't stop talking about this brown sugar maple latte of yours." Marcus smiled, heart beating fast. Would you like to try one? I would, the man said, nodding. Two, actually. My assistant is in the car. As Marcus prepared the drinks, he couldn't help but feel a sense of nervous excitement. Who was this man? Why did he feel so important? The man took a sip, his eyes widening slightly. He nodded in approval and then reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a sleek business card. Marcus, my name is Richard Everett. I own Everett Properties. We're working on a new development nearby, Everett Plaza. We're looking for a local coffee partner for the food court. I've heard good things about you, and this, he held up the latte. This is exceptional. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. Would you be interested in discussing a potential lease? Richard continued, his tone smooth, professional, but with an edge of curiosity. Marcus blinked, stunned. A spot in a brand new plaza? It felt impossible, like he was being offered a seat at a table he was never meant to even see, let alone join. I'd be honored, sir, Marcus finally stammered, his voice hoarse. Richard smiled, slipping the card into Marcus's hand. Let's set up a meeting next week. As the man walked away, Marcus stood frozen, the weight of the moment sinking in. Clara, who had arrived just in time to witness the exchange, rushed over, her eyes wide with disbelief. Marcus, did that just happen? She whispered, her voice barely audible. He turned to her, a slow smile spreading across his face, the card trembling in his hand. It happened, Clara, he whispered back. It really happened. But success, as Marcus would soon learn, came with its own storm clouds. The whispers in the market changed. Where once they'd sneered, now they grumbled with resentment. Marcus heard the snide comments as he worked. He's getting too big for his boots. Think he's better than us now? Must have had some help, probably some handout. Some vendors stopped speaking to him altogether, their faces tight with thinly veiled hostility. The market board, which had once ignored him, suddenly seemed interested in every little detail of his business, his permits, his signage, even the noise from his small generator. They called him in for a compliance review, citing vague issues that no one else seemed to face. It was exhausting. One night, after receiving yet another email from the board nitpicking his setup, Marcus sat slumped in his chair, staring at the walls of his apartment. The weight of it all pressed down like a lead blanket. He thought of giving up again. But then Clara called. Hey, she said softly. I know it's hard. I see it, Marcus. But you've come too far. Don't let them push you out. Her voice, as always, was a balm to his soul. That weekend, Marcus decided to fight back, not with anger, but with action. He invited the community to a free tasting event at the market, offering samples of his drinks and small pastries, hoping to win over even the most skeptical customers. He printed flyers thanking the market for their support and posted them around town. He even sent a personal invitation to the market board, including Richard Everett. And when the day came, the turnout was bigger than Marcus could have imagined. Families, students, retirees, they all came. The line snaked down the block. Clara was there, running cups, helping pour samples, her laughter bubbling over the crowd like sunlight. Even Hank stopped by, gruffly muttering, figured I'd see what all the fuss was about, before ordering a cup. Richard Everett showed up too, nodding in approval as he sipped another brown sugar maple latte. It wasn't just a coffee tasting. It was a statement. Marcus wasn't going anywhere. That night, as they cleaned up, Marcus turned to Clara, exhaustion etched into every line of his face, but a quiet pride shining in his eyes. Thank you, he whispered. For what? She asked, wiping sweat from her brow. For never letting me quit, Marcus said softly. Clara smiled, reaching over to squeeze his hand. You're not done yet, she whispered back. This is just the beginning. And Marcus believed her. Because for the first time in a long time, he felt it deep in his bones, he wasn't just surviving. He was thriving. Marcus had always believed that success would feel like a sunrise, a steady glow that warmed everything it touched, banishing the shadows that had clung to him for so long. But as the weeks turned into months, he realized that success was messier than that. The shadows didn't vanish. They just shifted, taking on new forms. Everett Plaza became a reality. The grand opening was a blur of camera flashes, smiling faces, and handshakes that lingered a bit too long. Marcus's coffee stand, now branded as Ever Brew by Marcus, stood proudly in the heart of the plaza. The sleek, minimalist design, with reclaimed wood counters and a chalkboard menu that Clara had helped him sketch, was everything Marcus had dreamed of. But the dream had sharp edges. The morning after the grand opening, Marcus arrived early, as always. The plaza was quiet, the sun casting long shadows across the gleaming tiles. As he unlocked the shop, he noticed something odd. A crumpled napkin, stuffed into the door handle. He pulled it out and froze. Scrawled in thick black marker were the words, "Know your place." His hands trembled. The message was clear, and it chilled him to the bone. Marcus looked around, but the plaza was still empty. For a moment, he considered calling the police, but he knew how that would go. It would be brushed off, minimized. Another misunderstanding. So he shoved the napkin into his pocket and tried to shake it off. But the whispers began again, insidious as ever. He got lucky, that's all. He's got rich friends now. I heard he's just a figurehead. They wanted a black face for the brand. The weight of those words pressed down on Marcus like a vice. Every time he walked into his shop, he felt eyes on him, watching, judging, waiting for him to stumble. Even some of his old supporters seemed distant now. Hank, who once offered encouragement, now avoided eye contact. The market vendors he'd grown close to barely nodded when they passed. It was as if his success had marked him as an outsider all over again. One particularly cold morning, Marcus was setting up when a familiar voice called out, "Hey, Marcus." He turned to see Clara hurrying over, her breath puffing in the air like smoke. "Hey, Clara." "I saw the news," she said, eyes shining. "The local paper ran a story about Everett Plaza's opening, and you were front and center." Marcus forced a smile, but Clara's face softened as she studied him. "What's wrong?" she asked gently. He hesitated. Then, pulling out the crumpled napkin from his coat pocket, he handed it to her without a word. Clara's eyes widened as she read the message. She looked up, her expression darkening. "Marcus, this is a threat." "I know," he said quietly. "Have you told anyone?" He shook his head. "What's the point? They'll just say I'm being paranoid." Clara sighed, tucking the napkin into her own pocket. "Then we'll handle it ourselves." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "We?" Clara grinned, fierce and determined. "You think I'm going to let them scare you off?" "Not a chance." That afternoon, Clara organized a small gathering at Everbrew, local artists, musicians, and a few loyal customers. They painted a mural on the side wall of the shop, a bold, vibrant image of a coffee cup blooming into a tree, its branches cradling symbols of community, books, musical notes, a small heart. At the bottom, they wrote, "Rooted together." It was a message, loud and clear. But as the mural took shape, Marcus noticed a man standing across the plaza, watching. He was stocky, with a crew cut and a scowl etched deep into his face. Marcus had seen him before, a vendor at the old market, one who'd never spoken much, but had always watched Marcus with narrowed eyes. When their gazes met, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. Was he in danger? Should he step back, slow down? But then he thought about Clara, about the mural, about the customers who smiled when they tasted his coffee, who told him they'd never had anything like it. He thought about his mother, who'd raised him to stand tall, no matter how hard the world tried to push him down. And he thought about the man who'd sent that napkin message, and all the others like him, men who thrived on fear, who wanted Marcus to believe he didn't belong. Marcus knew that if he backed down now, they'd win. So the next morning, he arrived at Everbrew early. He brewed a fresh pot of his signature brown sugar maple latte, wiped down the counters, and turned on the lights. When the first customers arrived, Marcus greeted them with a smile, his hands steady, his heart beating strong. Because this was his place, and no one was going to take it from him. Still feel like it's all over? Look how one act changed the entire city. The months that followed the mural unveiling were a blur of triumphs and quiet challenges for Marcus. His shop, Everbrew by Marcus, became more than a coffee stand. It became a symbol. People flocked from all corners of the city, drawn by the bold mural and the story behind it. Social media buzzed with photos of the colorful wall, hashtags like #RootedTogether and #Everbrew movement spreading like wildfire. Marcus found himself on local radio shows, invited to speak at community events, and even featured in a city magazine's top 10 entrepreneurs to watch. It was dizzying. Yet every time he stood in front of a microphone, sharing his story, he felt that same knot in his stomach, a reminder of the dark undercurrent that had tried to drag him down. Because for every cheer of support, there were still whispers. For every new customer, there were eyes watching him, waiting for him to slip. It was on a rainy Thursday afternoon, 6 months after the grand opening, that the weight of it all came crashing down. Marcus had been prepping for a new shipment, beans from a Black-owned farm in Ethiopia, a partnership he'd fought hard to establish when he received a call. It was Clara, her voice tight. "Marcus, there's been vandalism at the shop." His heart dropped. He raced over, rain pounding on the windshield, a sinking feeling in his chest. When he arrived, the sight that greeted him nearly brought him to his knees. The mural, his mural, the community's mural, was defaced. Black paint had been splashed across the tree, dripping down like tar, smothering the branches. The words "Know Your Place" were scrawled across it in harsh, jagged letters. Marcus stood in the rain, fists clenched, as Clara approached quietly. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. Then, with a deep breath, he spoke, his voice steady. "No, I'm not sorry. Not anymore." He turned to Clara, his eyes blazing. "They want me to feel small. They want to erase what we built. But we won't let them. We rebuild. We make it bigger, bolder." Word spread like wildfire. By the next morning, dozens of people gathered at the plaza, artists, students, parents, and strangers Marcus had never even met. They brought paint, brushes, and ladders. Clara had coordinated the effort overnight, rallying the community. Together, they didn't just repair the mural. They expanded it. The new mural exploded with color, vivid blues, fiery oranges, rich greens. The tree's branches now reached farther, holding even more symbols of hope: a stethoscope, a book, a chef's hat, a small pair of shoes. At the top, in bold letters, they wrote, "This is our place." And Marcus, standing there watching it take shape, felt something shift inside him. The weight of the hate, the fear, it wasn't gone, but it was shared now. It was lighter. He stepped forward, took a brush, and added his own mark, a golden sun rising above the tree, its rays stretching wide. That evening, as the last strokes dried, Marcus stood before the mural and spoke to the crowd that had gathered. "I know this journey hasn't been easy," he began, his voice carrying over the plaza. "I know there are those who didn't want me here, who told me to stay in my lane, to know my place. Well, let me tell you, this is my place. And it's yours too." Applause erupted, cheers filling the air. Then, as the crowd slowly dispersed, an older man approached quietly. He was small, stooped, with a weathered face and eyes that shimmered with a mix of shame and something deeper, regret. "Marcus," he said, voice gravelly. I wanted to say something. It was Hank." Marcus tensed, unsure. Hank swallowed hard, looking down at his shoes. "I wasn't kind to you. I let my own fears and ignorance get the better of me. I judged you before I ever really saw you. Marcus felt a tightness in his chest. Hank looked up, eyes glistening. I was wrong. And I'm sorry. For a long moment, they stood in silence. Then, Marcus extended his hand. Thank you, Hank, he said quietly. They shook, and Marcus felt something heavy lift. Weeks later, Marcus returned the favor in a way that would ripple through the community. Hank, a retired carpenter, had been struggling financially. Marcus partnered with him to create handcrafted furniture for Everbrew, tables, chairs, even a custom coffee bar. The shop became a showcase not just for Marcus's coffee, but for Hank's craftsmanship. When customers asked about the tables, Marcus would smile and say, "These were made by Hank, one of the best in the business." And as Hank worked alongside Marcus, sanding wood and fixing joints, he seemed to stand a little taller. It wasn't just a coffee shop anymore. It was a place of second chances, of redemption, of community. And Marcus never forgot the people who'd stood by him, the ones who painted, who cheered, who believed. Because in the end, success wasn't just about proving the haters wrong. It was about building something together. Something that no amount of hate could tear down. Thank you for being with me until the end. Remember, even one voice can change the world. On to new stories.